Welcome, students. We're going to take some notes on the executive branch, the roles of the president and vice president. So let's begin our notes. So, intro to the executive branch. The executive branch carries out the laws of the land and conducts public and foreign affairs. Make sure you write this down. The executive branch is not just simply the president and vice president, but is also bureaucracy, which is departments and agencies within the government. So make sure to write both of those down. When we think of the executive branch, we think of just simply the president and vice president and the cabinet members. There's also a lot of bureaucracy within there as well. Bureaucracy means departmental government, different agencies within there. So the FBI does report through the executive branch. They're a type of agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, CIA as well. And so the executive branch carries out the laws of the land, conducts public and foreign affairs. The legislative branch, Congress and Senate, they create the laws, but the executive branch carries out the laws. As you can see right here, the layout of the White House. You got the Oval Office, which is in the West Wing, as they call it, and that's where the president does most of his or her work. We always think that it's the middle of the White House, but really it's the West Wing where most of that happens. So, informal qualifications for the president. Constitutional requirements are simply to be natural-born citizen, over 35 years of age, resident of the U.S. for 14 years. So you can be born here and then leave the country, but you have to have been living here for a consecutive 14 years before running. Informal qualifications would be political experience, former governors, senators, usually executive experience is really helpful, so like a governor. Speaking ability is very important, being able to be a good communicator, as we saw with Barack Obama and with Ronald Reagan. Pleasant and healthy appearance, happily married, attractive, those are helpful, especially with the media and such like that. As you can see right here, family is helpful for these informal qualifications. Religion typically has been Protestant, tends to be plus if you want to be president. So if you are of a different religion, it becomes a little bit more challenging. However, we have had one president that has broken the mold of the Protestant, and that would be JFK. He was the first Catholic and only Catholic president that we've had. Gender male, typically, and reputation is very helpful. Terms and benefits. The 22nd Amendment officially limited the presidential terms to 2 years, which means no more than 10 years. So, for example, with Lyndon Baines Johnson, when he was sworn into the presidency, 3 years into Kennedy's first term when he was assassinated, Johnson ran for a full term, 4 years, but then he could have run for another 4 years. However, he didn't. So the only president to ever win or run more than 2 terms, to successfully be president for more than 8 years, would be FDR. Well done. Benefits, you don't need to write these down, but salary, White House, 132 rooms, full staff, chef, automobiles, Air Force One, Marine One, which is the helicopter. There's a lot of different perks and benefits that happen. Also, you get Secret Service for life, which is kind of nice. Travel, entertainment, Camp David, Camp David Retreat Center. Many different perks that exist, but you don't need to write down those benefits, just the 22nd Amendment. When it comes to the vice president, this is called balancing the ticket. The vice president is chosen by the presidential candidate Consider ideology, age, experience, etc. Classic example would be Donald Trump versus Mike Pence. Donald Trump was elected because people wanted him to be outspoken, unpredictable, mixed record of conservative actions, no political experience, from New York. Those are things that people wanted in the presidency because they wanted to mix things up. However, they also wanted to make sure they have that balance. Part of the establishment, Mike Pence's long record of conservative actions, restrained, former congressman and governor of Indiana, kind of young-ish, believe it or not, even though the hair color would mislead you. So vice president is chosen by the presidential candidate, and it's the at the convention that it's confirmed. Rules of the president. So we have several different rules that are important that you'll need to note. We're going to cover 6 here. So chief of state. This is ceremonial head of the U.S. government. It's kind of a symbol of the country. Example, you don't need to write down this example, but giving speeches, honors, hosting dinners. The president is the chief of state, the face of the nation. And that's why it's not just voting based on the economy or on picking the judicial appointments, but it's also being the face of the nation and such. Chief executive decides how the laws of the U.S. are to be enforced. And so, again, it's the Congress that creates the laws, but it's the president that enforces the laws. So if a president doesn't want to enforce a law, they actually don't have to. However, they could be impeached if it's that severe of a lack of enforcement. But executive orders, they can enforce the law through appointments, executive officials, heads of bureaucracy. So the Congress creates the laws, but it's the president that really enforces those. The president is also known as the chief diplomat, the nation's chief spokesman to the rest of the world and designer of foreign policy. And we've seen that foreign policy change from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. They meet with foreign leaders and they form treaties. And so a very important role with the rest of the world. Yes, the president cannot officially declare war. That's Congress's responsibility alone. However, they do meet with foreign leaders and form those treaties. Chief legislator, again, remember that to legislate means to carry out a law. Chief legislator, main designer of public policy, uses the bully pulpit as President Teddy Roosevelt called it, influence congressional agenda. And so they can design public policy by really being that spokesperson to get laws passed. The use of veto as well. So Congress does not just create their laws without the president. The president can encourage those laws and bully those laws, but also can veto those laws. A couple more things for the president. The president is also the commander-in-chief in control of the nation's armed forces, decides where troops are sent. So officially, yes, it's the generals that advise the president, boots on the ground. However, it's the president that actually decides where. Gives military orders as well. Meets with the Joint Chief of Staff and with the Pentagon. However, they give the official military orders. You also have the Chief Party. Chief of party, acknowledged leader of his political party. Chooses party leadership for important positions. And also promotes his party's agenda. And so they are not just simply a president, they're also the face of their political party, and the political party endorses them. Presidential powers alone, executive orders enforcing policy apart from Congress. Executive agreement doesn't require Senate consent with executive agreements. Recognition of foreign nations. So the president can recognize foreign nations without the Congress's approval. Veto power or pocket veto. They can simply not look at a law for 10 days and then it's a pocket veto. It has to go back to the Congress. Reprieves and pardons, communication, amnesty. So when it comes to individuals that have broken Congress's laws, they can actually give them pardons to take that away. Give State of the Union addresses, and so they speak to the nation more than any other. So those are powers alone for the president. But what are shared powers? Shared powers would be appointment power. Senate must approve the appointments. So there's this sharing of powers. The president appoints, but the Senate must approve. The war powers must receive congressional permission for extended military action. So there's that sharing of powers there, that checks and balances, as we call it. And then form treaties. The Senate has to ratify the treaties that are formed, and so there is that sharing of powers as well. So the president has some things that they can do specifically alone. The executive orders, the executive agreements, recognition of foreign nations, veto, reprieves, and State of the Union addresses. However, there are shared presidential powers as well. What about the vice presidency? If the appointment process, president appoints new VP, Congress must approve with majority vote of both houses. So the Congress must approve a new VP if that happens. Gerald Ford is the only president never to be elected to presidency or vice president. He would technically not be the vice president yet. He would not be voted in by the people, so to speak, with an election. So it was the Congress that approved him. Presidential succession. So the question always is, if the president dies, what? Well, presidential succession is a process by which a president vacancy is filled. The 25th Amendment, the vice president will become president in the case of death or resignation. The Presidential Succession Act of 1947 declares the order of succession after the vice president, which if the president would die and the vice president would die without naming a new vice president, the Speaker of the House would become the president. If that person were to die as well, the president pro tempore would become the president. And then it would go down the list of different secretaries, whether it's the Secretary of State and the 14 other cabinet members there as well. Presidential disability. The vice president temporarily becomes president if president informs Congress in writing that he is unable to carry out his duties, or two, the vice president and majority of cabinet members inform Congress in writing. And in writing is the key. So if the president were not dead yet, but were injured, maybe in a coma, this happened with Ronald Reagan when he was shot. He had to go in for surgery. Also, the same thing happened with George W. Bush. And so what happens is that the vice president is then acting president for that number of hours or days as needed, but that is only with vice president and majority of cabinet members informing Congress in writing. So vice president and cabinet can challenge. Congress has 21 days to decide. So that is an introduction to the Executive branch, the roles of the president.